Hello everybody, this is Dan Miller for Bluegrass Unlimited magazine, and today we've got Improvisation Part 4. Most of what I'm going to play for you today is off the old DVD that Tim May and I did years ago. But first, a little recap. Remember, improvisation number 1 was simply to play the notes of the chord over whatever chord is being played in the song. At the time that song is on that chord, you simply play the notes of the chord as your solo. And we talked about various ways that you can make that a little bit more less random than just randomly playing notes of the chord by using phrasing and following the contour of what you hear the song doing and the timing or phrasing the rhythm of the song. The next thing was that we took the notes of the major pentatonic scale, and the scale, first of all, you could just play the G major pentatonic scale over a 1-4-5 progression in the key of G, and that would work okay. To refine that a little bit more, when you were over the G chord or the 1 chord, you played the pentatonic scale relating to that root. When you went to the 4 chord, you played the pentatonic scale related to that root. When you played the 5 chord, you played the pentatonic scale related to that root. Now, as luck would have it, as these things were arranged, you're still never leaving the key. All of the notes of those 3 pentatonic scales are in the key of whatever the 1 chord is. So we're still remaining within the key. The next stage was to learn the scale of the key and just play notes of the scale of the key over the progression. That will work, but again, sometimes it's not going to sound as great as you might want it to be. So the next phase in this progression, after playing the notes of the chord, playing the pentatonic scales, and then playing the major scale, was to start to target chord tones. And last week we targeted the root note of the chord. Once you target the root note of the chord, when the chord changed, for the rest of that chord you were free to play notes out of the scale of the key of the root. Okay, we're not leaving the key. For instance, if we're in the key of G, we never leave those 7 notes of the G scale. We're just arranging them in a way that we're going to play the root note when the chord changes. Now, to make it sound even better, you can play chord tones at the top of every measure, because this is kind of how melodies are built. But last week we just dealt with playing the root of the chord when the chord changed. Then until the next chord change, you were free to play any note out of the scale of the key. Today what we're going to focus on is playing the third. Every major scale has 3 notes, the 1st, 3rd, and 5th scale degrees. Last week we focused on the root. This week we're going to focus on the 3rd and the 5th. Now, that means that anytime a chord changes, you can hit either the 1st, 3rd, or 5th scale degrees when the chord changes, and then for the rest of the time you're on that chord before the next chord change, you're free to play whatever notes out of the scale you want to play. This helps to organize your solo in a way that it is organized when people write melodies, so you're getting closer to the melody of the song. Now, here's the real benefit of this. If you spend time really working to first play the root every time the chord changes, then learn how to play the 3rd note of the scale every time the chord changes, and again, right now we're just working with a 1-4-5 progression, then and then learn how to play the 5th scale degree when the chord changes. Spend time practicing each one of those things. What will start to happen is that when you go to a jam, and again, we're working with songs you've never heard before. You're at a jam and a song comes up that you've never soloed before, possibly even never heard before. These are the techniques we're going to use to take our solo on that song. Once you get used to the tonality of that 1st, 3rd, and 5th scale degrees in your head, and it's only 3 notes, and the tonalities are quite different. Once your ear can recognize the tonalities of those 3 notes relative to the chord, you'll start to pick the right one when the chord changes, because you've heard the song go around the circle a few times, and subconsciously, intuitively, you're going to start training your ear and picking up these things if you do the exercises we recommend. So you're going to get closer and closer to that melody because your ear is being trained in doing the exercises where we're going to target the root and the third and the fifth. Typically, I'll take my students, my private students, through this whole process. After they've practiced the root, and then later they practice the third, and then later they practice targeting the fifth. After they've done that for a while, when they come to the lesson, I'll name a song, and I'll keep naming songs until it's a song they've never heard of. I'll sing a chorus and a verse, and then I will ask them to take a solo. And typically they'll start to, their ear will naturally start to gravitate toward those notes that are in the melody, because I'll ask them to just randomly play a chord tone when the chord changes, and their ear will start to gravitate towards the right one, even though they don't know the song. Just hearing it one time, their ear starts to get trained and they pick that stuff up. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the old DVD with Tim May and I, and listen to that and practice targeting the roots, then targeting thirds, then targeting fifths. And I think you'll find that it's using this technique when you take your solos, improvised solos, you'll have good success. Now once you've developed the skill where you can target the root note and then play chord tones after that until the next chord changes, and then target that root note and play notes of the key, the scale of the key behind that, and then continue in that process, the next skill you want to develop is to be able to target the other chord tones of the chords that you're changing to. And again, these tones are all going to be in the scale of the key. Mm-hmm. And for diatonic songs, for the simple songs we're working with here. So let's go ahead and work on targeting the third. The third, you know, the chord is made up of the first, third, and fifth tones of the scale, and we've just worked on the first tone. So let's work on the third and then follow that by the fifth. And here's the reason. If your ear, we already got the root down, we've already practiced that, we know how to target the first note of the scale. Almost every basic melody, even melodies to complex tunes, will hit a chord tone when the chord changes. And so if you develop the skill to be able to hit any of the chord tones when the chord changes, you're going to be getting closer to the melody, because sometimes the melodies are going to be on a third or a fifth when the chord changes. And if you learn how to develop just that skill, we're not trying to play the whole melody, we're just targeting one of 3 notes that would be one of 3 notes where the melody is going to land on the chord change. And again, like I said before, this is a great way to find your place again if you get lost. If you're playing along in your solo and you go, it's like, oh man, I lost my spot, I don't know where I am. Play scale notes until the chord changes, and when you hear the chord change, hit one of those chord notes, and then you're back on track, you know. And so this is how you sort of get yourself back to shore if you've gone too far out into the ocean with your solo. It's the way you found your foundation again. So do you want to talk about the third notes and where they are? Or?
Yeah. Just keep in mind that a chord is only made up of 3 notes. You know, the 1, the third note of the scale, and the fifth note of the scale, a major chord. And so any other thing that's going to happen is going to be some kind of extension of that chord. Usually happens more in jazz. So don't worry about anything. If you hear somebody say something about a major 7 or any of that stuff, that's only an extension. We only got 3 notes in a chord, in a major chord. And so we're targeting the third in this case. Now the third is very important because it colors things a lot more than the root. Mm-hmm. Remember that the third note of the scale, there's the third, is what makes the difference in a minor and a major chord. If I flat that third, and here I've got a G minor. There's a G major, there's my third. I flat that third, and it's a minor chord. It's a very important tone because it's so important in coloring things. that's why if you can target it, your playing really starts to move to the next level, because the root is the best thing to start with, it's the easiest thing to remember, but it's going to be kind of obvious to you and to everybody else. So targeting the third is great. And let me say too that now we're in the it's actually easier to think of the 7 notes, the full 7 notes of a scale at some point, rather than the pentatonic. The pentatonic is a good thing to start with to get you playing safe notes. But when we start targeting these different chord tones, it's actually easier to just remember I can play all 7. It's, to me, it's more freeing to just forget the pentatonic and to think I can play any of the notes of a G scale. I can start on the third. Here's my third. I'm still playing G scale notes everywhere I go. And here's the other thing that's more freeing than the pentatonic thing. When we're playing all 7 notes, if we're in the key of G and it goes to C, I'm going to target a C, right? Target a root. In this case, we're going to target the third, which is E. Here's C. 1, 2, 3 is E. I'm in the key of G, so even though I'm playing a C chord, I'm still going to play a G scale. I'm not changing to the key of C. I'm not playing a C scale. C scale has an F in it. We're still playing G, which has an F sharp in it. So it's going to be the same thing when it goes to D. Targeting a D when I'm playing a G scale, same notes for a G scale. In this case, we're targeting the third. Here's D. 1, 2, 3 is F sharp. That's where I'm going to start when the chord tone changes. I'm targeting that. Still playing G scale. Okay. So that's, like I said, in a lot of ways, the full 7 notes of the scale are easier to remember. And remember, once you target the third in this case, after you target that note on the top of the measure, you're free for the rest of the measure. You have freedom. So you don't have to think about anything else if you know your G scale. All right, so shall we try that? Is that enough preliminary?
Yeah, I'll play the same progression. You this time target the third on the change.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, there you go. And remember, when we talk about targeting thirds, it'd be nice if everything was completely, simple all the time. You're going to remember that for every chord you're thinking of the third. In other words, when I'm in G, I'm thinking of a B. When it goes to C, the third of a C is an E. Like I said, we can sort of only water this down so much. You just have to remember that. When it goes to C, you're not thinking of the third of a G, right? So. Anyway, like I said, the thirds it's going to really take your playing up the next level. And once you alternate the root and the third, and mix those up, all of a sudden you've got exponentially a lot of different things that can happen. And
you're more easily able to fit a melody.
Yeah.
Because the melody might go to the third note of the chord when the chord changes, and your ear will eventually develop to hear that.
Right.
So, are we ready to move on to the fifth?
Let's do the fifth, yeah.
Okay. Why don't you talk about the fifth in general?
Yeah, so we've got the 5th note of the scale. That's the third note of the triad. You get your 1, 3rd, and your 5th. So I can target the 5th the same way we've been doing, the 3rd and the root so far. So in G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be D. In C, I just count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be G. And in D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be A. So for G, my 5th is D. For C, my 5th is G. For D, my 5th is A. Sounds like a lot, didn't it? And like I said, let's face it, to a certain extent, you just have to know to memorize this stuff and learn what the notes of the triad are.
Well, this is, just let me interject here. A lot of people don't like practicing scales.
Right.
However, this is just knowledge you need to have if you're going to be a good guitar player. It's just something it's a skill you got to develop, is knowing the scale. And I will say that a lot of people think about scale practice as just robotically running up and down, ascending and descending scales. That's not how you necessarily need to practice. What I like to do is practice the scale until I know it, but then do a free-form sort of playing over the scale, and it could be over a chord progression like this. this is a good way to practice your scales, is just take a chord progression and target the root when the chord changes, and then otherwise play those scale tones in a free-form improvisational way, and you're practicing your scales in a way that's interesting and creative. So this is a great way to practice scales. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and we finally actually will get around to targeting the fifth here, but I want to say one thing very quickly. I'm calling these notes out. I'm saying G, D. You know, I'm doing all this C and G, and I'm calling them out, and you may be going, oh, wow, I can't deal with that. Let me say, I didn't learn to play that way. I learned my G scale. I just know through the years what to call the notes. When I first started playing, I didn't know what the notes were. I just started playing. And so, but when we're teaching, we have to use some kind of terminology. So you don't even have to know that. I can lay down a G chord, and I know this is my triad. I don't care what you call them. I don't have to know what they are. And when I'm playing, I'm not calling the notes in my head. I can to some extent, but in other words, don't worry about the academia of that, of necessarily being able to have to name everything. Just start playing.
If you know your chord shape, guess what? There's all your chord tones.
They're sitting right there.
They're under your fingers.
Right.
So you don't really have to think about the scale, just think about the chord. So let's do an example of.
All right, so we're targeting fifths, and the same idea where once I target on the top of the measure, I can play anything after that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there you have it. Most of the time when you end a song, you'll end on the root. The ear tends to want to hear that, but we're targeting the fifth. So,
and there you go. So the first step in learning how to improvise is learning how to target chord tones when the chords change. Not that tough. Just practice and you'll get it. Okay, there we have it. So next time we'll go on to the next part of the improvisation process, where we'll give you some new techniques, different scale to look at that will help, just give a little bit more of a flavor to your solos. So this is Dan Miller from Bluegrass Unlimited magazine. We'll see you next time.